Hi, my name's Kelly and we're out in my garden today and I'm about to make purple sauerkraut. Let's start with the story. So it's 2014 and I'm starting my very first garden. I tilled the soil, I put up a fence, I even did research on companion planting so that I could orchestrate the perfect layout. I was jazzed, I was determined, I was having a good time and everything went great. I had a great harvest, no major failures, but I ended up getting a whole bunch of cabbage, like 15 large heads of cabbage. And for those of you who do not know, 15 large heads of cabbage absolutely do not fit in a refrigerator that you're actually like using. And I wasn't prepared for what the heck to do. Somehow with all my preparations and research, I did not anticipate this. I didn't know what to do with all this cabbage. I had heard from my dad about his grandma making sauerkraut from scratch from her garden using a big crock with a stone and the mandolin to shave it really thin, but we didn't have any of those tools, so I didn't know if I could do that or what I would need if I didn't have those things. So do you want to know what ended up happening to all those beautiful huge heads of cabbage that I grew from seed with love and attention and care? We used what we could. We stored the rest in the basement, and then I left for college and they all went slimy and moldy and rotted. It would have been a huge waste if I had not learned the lesson to prepare for the harvest that you're sowing. So ever since then, I've been trying to redeem myself as a gardener by making sauerkraut. Before we head into the kitchen and get started on making the sauerkraut, I have a little bit of a confession to make. This cabbage is from the grocery store. I didn't grow it. It's not organic, but I'm still gonna make sauerkraut. My garden this year is not what I would have hoped or what it usually is. I had been really frustrated. Of course, like the one year that I slack off on my garden, you're talking about recession, food shortages. What's stopping me from putting up food anyway? Just because I didn't grow it doesn't mean I can't be storing food or be preparing. So let's go to the kitchen and get started. All right, welcome to my kitchen. I have all of my ingredients and supplies set up. I have a recipe from the Ball Blue Book on preserving, which is a great resource. Even if you're not a canner, there's recipes for freezing, fermenting, dehydrating, as well as canning. So I have everything we need out already. As far as ingredients, all you need is cabbage and salt. And the recipe calls for canning or preserving salt, but you could also use this pink Himalayan salt or sea salt. So for supplies, what we'll need is a large bowl, some wide mouth mason jars. You can use regular mouth mason jars. I just find it easier to pack the vegetables in tight with a wide mouth because you can really get your hand in there. A cutting board and a knife. And I have this fermentation kit that I will explain to you quickly. So I don't necessarily recommend this specific brand or anything, but what I like about this type of kit is that it converts mason jars, which most of us who are into preserving foods and gardening already have, into a vessel that you can ferment in. This type of kit is not necessary. There are ways that you can ferment in a mason jar without this kind of kit, and with each piece of the kit I'll explain what you can use alternatively if you don't have one of these kits or you aren't able to buy one. So what the kit comes with is 3 different things. One is this glass weight, and it's nice because it has a little handle so you can lift it out easy. This weight is important because it weighs down the vegetables to keep them under the brine, which I will talk more about and why that's important in fermenting. And then it comes with these silicone lids that fit inside a mason jar ring, and you can get them for wide mouth or regular mouth. And then it also comes with this wooden, I don't even know what they call it, this wooden stick. You will see me use it. It's for mashing down the vegetables to squish it, pack it down tight, make sure it's under the brine. Again, you don't need this to do this. You can use a clean hand to pack down the vegetables. So as far as the glass weights, one way I've seen others get around that is using like the little tiny mason jars. I don't remember what size that would be. Like, is it a half a pint? The smallest jars filled with water with the lid on them, and they fit into a wide mouth jar, and that can act as your weight. That may or may not be cheaper, but some people may just already have those jars handy, so that's another alternative. So what this silicone lid does is it has a little hole on top here that allows gases to escape, but also it's a lid. It doesn't let anything else in. You don't need a silicone lid like this that lets the gases escape. You can use a regular new or used canning lid, but this is not going to let the gases escape. What you do then is every day you kind of crack it open and let the gases escape so that your jar doesn't explode. You can already see why this would be nice. So you're not fussing with it every day or worrying about your glasses or your jars exploding. So again, the kit's not necessary, but it is cool, it is helpful. So the first thing we're gonna do is peel the outer leaves from the cabbages. I already washed these. You don't want to throw these away right away. You want to save a couple because we're going to use these later. So I just throw them in a bowl to use later, and the rest we don't use is going to the compost. Damn, I forgot I made this pretty bouquet yesterday to put on the table while I was filming to make everything cuter. So take notice. I'm going to bring you in closer because next what we're going to do is we're going to core and chop this cabbage. I want you guys to see how that goes. I'm gonna put on a time lapse because otherwise that would be super boring. But I want you to see I'm not fussing around trying to make these super thin slices that a mandolin, I'm not even sure if that's really what it's called, but you know the tool I'm talking about, that you slide the cabbage across and it creates these perfectly thin slices. It's traditionally used for making sauerkraut. It is also traditionally known for cutting your fingertips off. So, and also I just don't have one. So a cutting board and a chef's knife work just fine. You do not need to cut thin slices. One thing I like about having thicker slices for sauerkraut is that once it's fermented, it holds its texture better. It is still crunchy. It is not this soggy, wilted, you know, what most people think of with sauerkraut. I prefer that my sauerkraut still has a little crunch. I have a weird cat who loves vegetables. So I'm actually going to stop there because my bowl is really full. There's no way I'm going to be able to stir that if I add any more. So our recipe calls for 25 pounds or 5 large heads of cabbage. I was only able to fit 3 heads of cabbage in this bowl, so I'm going to stop there and just cut back on my salt because otherwise I'm not going to be able to stir in the salt if I fill this anymore. So we're going to do maybe like, I don't know, like less than half a cup. Just think of it as an experiment. So the salt, we're going to mix it in a little bit and then let it sit. So the salt is going to draw out water from the cabbage and create a brine. I won't go into depth about how this type of fermentation works. There's lots of resources on learning more about that, but what I will say is that the salt's doing a very important job. By drawing out the water and creating a brine, it is preserving and then creating a very specific environment to favor the types of microbes that we want for the fermentation process, and creating an unfavorable environment for bacteria and molds and things that we don't want that would cause things to rot or spoil. So we'll come back to this bowl of salty cabbage in a few minutes. The recipe says just a few minutes, but in my experience, giving it 20 to 30 minutes will ensure that enough water has been pulled out. I think maybe because I don't cut it in thin slices, it takes a little bit longer. So we can go back out to the garden while we wait for this to just kind of sit and do its thing. The salt in the fermentation process preserved the cabbage into a salty, probiotic superfood. And the reason I say superfood is for two reasons. One is for the probiotic. So fermented foods have a live and active culture of a variety of microbes that are healthy for our gut. And if you've not looked into or researched gut health or the gut-brain connection, I really encourage you to do so. It's super fascinating, and it's super important for our immune system, our mental health, and of course, our nutrition and how we are able to digest foods. The second reason is there is so much research on vegetables from the cabbage family showing that they are anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer. So many chronic diseases are caused by what could be simplified as inflammation. That is undeniable. So any kind of food that has like antioxidant or anti-inflammatory properties is super. And as far as food preservation goes, sauerkraut can, after it's fermented and completed, you can either can it so that it's shelf stable, but then you lose the probiotic aspect of the food, but it's shelf stable. Or you can leave it active and refrigerate it or put it in a root cellar where it's at a stable, cool temperature. And even if you are refrigerating this sauerkraut, it is still a space saver compared to the equivalent of how many heads of cabbage you'd have to store, because it's cored, it's chopped, and it's compacted into those jars. So I bet our cabbage is ready to be packed into the jars, so let's head back to the kitchen. All right, I'm back to check. Oh, it feels wiltier and looks wetter. I think it might be ready to put in the jars. All right, so it's been about an unknown amount of time. I think maybe 20 minutes. But anyway, our cabbage is ready. It's very wet. Like there's a pool of liquid on the bottom. When I squeeze it, you can see a lot of water is running out. That's the brine. So after we have these jars all packed and set in the cabinet to ferment, there's actually not a set amount of time that it takes to become sauerkraut. The Blue Book recipe says 3 to 6 weeks to let it sit. That's a pretty large window, and that's because it depends on the environment and the temperatures and all that. So to determine when it's done, you actually want to taste it throughout the process, starting when it's still raw and then maybe at 1 week and then a few days after that until you recognize it as sauerkraut. Of course, like once it is fermenting, you'll want to be careful to use like a clean utensil to get a little taste out so that you're not contaminating anything. There's a large window and a lot of wiggle room that should be reassuring. There's not a whole lot of hard rules for this. Come here, you. You see how the brine is coming up over the top the more I press it down? It's pressing air out, getting the cabbage more compact. And if I can get it all under the brine, then it is not exposed to oxygen and it'll be fermented by anaerobic microorganisms. And you don't want any on the sides here because they can get moldy. The flowers are not required. The wine, optional but encouraged. And I still have my head chopped off. So these leaves that I saved from the outsides of the cabbage, the reason is because we're going to use them to help keep all the little pieces of cabbage under the brine. I did not do this last time and it was kind of a headache because all these little pieces would sneak up onto the side of the jar and get moldy and you have to sneak them out. So this like large piece you put in there just to help keep everything under the brine. Everything's fine. Now we have a gallon of future sauerkraut. So I have some sauerkraut that I made yesterday that I already have in the cabinet fermenting that I want to show you guys. But I have it sitting on a towel because sometimes some of the brine kind of bubbles up. So that's just to catch any possible mess. And you can already see some bubbles forming. That is gases being produced in the fermentation process. I should preface too that if you didn't notice, I am not an expert. But what I am encouraging is not that you do exactly as I say because I know what I'm doing. I'm just hoping to inspire somebody to try something, to see it as a fun experiment. It is cheap to make your own sauerkraut. Even today, cabbage at the grocery store is cheap. And you can experiment with these kind of things low risk using grocery store vegetables. You don't have to grow your own cabbage to make your own sauerkraut. And it is actually probably better that you practice on grocery store cabbage because how sad would it be if my little experiment, what if that goes completely wrong and I just spent all summer tending and loving and weeding and watering and fertilizing this cabbage and then harvesting, washing, peeling, chopping, salting, packing into jars for it to go bad? That is going to feel like a huge loss. But if I can do these kinds of experiments for fun on just grocery store cabbage, I'm learning a lot, low risk, low cost, but it is highly valuable to me as someone who is wanting to get into this food fermenting, food preserving lifestyle. So I hope that point was clear, but if not, there you go. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye. Okay.